Kids, okay, so hello and welcome to episode 12 of the Sales Syndicate Podcast now, and I'm joined by Nic Biffen again, and we're going to be going sort of deep or sort of diving back into funding rounds. So our first episode a couple of weeks ago on funding or on sales triggers, we looked at funding rounds and each of the subcategories or sort of triggers that we track within the funding round category. And today we're going to be talking about expansion plans, and there's another 5 subcategories within expansion plans. But I'll hand over to Nic for a very brief introduction. And then we'll crack on with expansion plans.
Yeah, good to be on again. Giving some insight into how different sales triggers can lead to spend within an organization, or more specifically, growth, and that will come in many different forms. What we're really touching on here is expansion plans, and again, within this, there's 4 or 5 different remits really in terms of different opportunities that can come with different forms of expansion. So we want to really delve down and dig a little deeper into those and ultimately what they can lead to. So yeah, pretty excited to get going on this one as well.
Now, I think there are, just a bit of a recap, there are, I think, 116 sales triggers that we track here at Selligence. Now, there are countless ways that you can track each of those. So we will be giving you a bit of insight as to, of the expansion plan sort of topic that we're touching on today, where you could look in order to track those manually. If you wanted to, obviously, each of the sales triggers that we're going to be speaking about over the next few weeks is extremely valuable in its own right, and then obviously as a collective of 115 or 116 sales triggers, they are beyond valuable. But yeah, so let's kick off on expansion plans. So when we're talking about expansion plans, are we talking physical? Are we talking headcount? What are we talking about?
There's a big gap actually that in terms of there's multiple different forms, but ultimately a lot of them, if you can spot them, are early signs of growth. So without actually the company announcing that they're going to go through growth, or perhaps other forms, they're about to launch a new product or maybe a new tool or new geographical focus, is a very early indicator that there are movements being made to help support that vision or that movement into a new space. And ultimately, again, if you're able to track them in real time, it's a really good opportunity or scope to start reaching out, building a relationship ahead of that major announcement coming out within the market.
Okay, so I guess if we're going to start with probably the most obvious, right? So if we go sort of top down, so expansion plans starting at the top is probably general expansion, right? As just as a wider company. So what are we talking about in terms of general expansion?
Yeah, again, so in a couple of different forms, really, but organizations, everybody will start off from their initial hub as a business, and ultimately through growth, they'll look to cement, additional teams or offices within different regions, different countries, obviously to help them support, whether there are language barriers if they're launching within another country, or it may even be due to time zones. So general expansion really, and probably the major one on this, is the announcement of opening of new offices, obviously to support that I mentioned. So this will come then with an array of, I suppose, other complications within the background. So for argument's sake, if you are a, let's say, fintech organization, you're dealing within digital format, digital currency, then the complications will align from multiple different facets. So if you are operating out of the UK and you are suddenly looking to open up and launch across the US, for example, the complications within that will delve right down from obviously currency that they are dealing in. Again, things like customer support across different time zones. It may even actually come down to complications such as different tax laws. That's very, very vast across the US and actually varies from state to state. So suddenly where you can start to understand, okay, well, they're launching or announce that they're opening a new office within this location, it's suddenly an opportunity outside of that to start to think of the other implicating factors that are going to play a part within that launch of that new arm of the business. So really, where you're starting to look for those different opportunities, this can come in from a multitude, really, from a legal perspective, compliance, from a regulatory aspect, can even come across even from more of a staffing point of view, and across obviously HR laws changing, even from like staff payroll, for example. It really does start to implicate and affect all those different factors that will then go into that business. So ultimately, from a sales professional that's looking for new opportunities to sell their product, whatever that may be, to fit in with that, they really need to start thinking around, okay, well, within that specific region, what is it that could perhaps influence or change? But ultimately, as much of these organizations will have, they will have consultancies that are helping them go through this migration and transition in terms of opening those new offices. But realistically, there's probably still going to be a lot of things down at a day-to-day level, perhaps that they haven't thought of, and that again, more so thinking more around, okay, what about how are the team going to operate? Is there different factors that affect that sales team's outreach within the day? For argument's sake, if they're in the US on the East Coast and they're having to sell right across the US, how's that then going to differ if they're reaching out to the West Coast, for example? There's a lot of other factors within here where there's opportunity to sell different products and different services into that business to help obviously fund and support that move. Ultimately, behind the scenes as well, in order for an organization to open a new office, there's going to be some funding and there's going to be a budget in place in order to help them get that off the ground. So there's a good opportunity for spend within that, but really it's from a sales point of view, it's understanding the reach out, but really getting in to understand the pains that company has experienced, and actually what's the process that they've been through their consultancy, in order to open that new office. And it's then finding the gaps in terms of where your product can help support that move. And ultimately, let's face it, any new business that's opening within a new region, there's a strategic reason why they have chosen to do that. Maybe that's in terms of the additional revenue predominantly that they can get from that. Is it around the bigger deal sizes that they may be able to get? Is it around actually a bigger market in terms of where their ICP customer fits? It's around understanding that to then essentially funnel back in, and ultimately getting your product and your pricing point to fit within that budget allocation.
So, because I guess we're talking about general expansion here, would you say that there's perhaps a bit more initial groundwork required, like you said, in order to find out those specific pains? Because general expansion, I guess there's a plethora, a multitude of different things that could be going on within that general expansion that obviously could fit your ICP or it might not. So there's perhaps a little bit more legwork to begin with.
100%. I think I've talked a lot there from like new office expansion and that side of things. You've also got the other side of it, perhaps, where an organization has announced actually they're going to increase their employee headcount by 30% in the next year. There is a reason behind that, and typically what will have been worked very heavily on is around the metrics that are supporting that. So again, that may be due to some investment that they've had, and that's the reason why they can increase this headcount. But ultimately, what it does prove is that they've proved their existence or their reason why they're in the market. So they've got a product market fit. They've got an understanding from a metric point of view in terms of, okay, well, we've got this member of staff, this is the revenue that we have produced. We've really drilled down on our ICP market. Now, if we start to add in this extra headcount, X, Y, and Z, then we're confident that we can achieve these revenues in the next year, which is why they're starting to put those figures or statistics in terms of the number of additional people that they need to add into the organization.
Okay, then. So for that general expansion, can you share, I guess, one or two places that you could look to track that? Is it just a case of, Google alerts, company websites? Where's the best place to sort of monitor these general expansions?
I think predominantly that will be the major part of it. I mean, the one that obviously really rings out is actually tracking, what are companies hiring for? That's the big indicator really in terms of, what are they starting to look to achieve through their recruitment process. So, if there's access into the likes of job boards, they're obviously a good indicator. But ultimately, looking from sales professional's point of view, LinkedIn is a great indicator to that. And actually, if you're trying to look at the target markets of clients, you have got the insights page as well in terms of on a company profile on LinkedIn. So that can give you an indication in terms of, what's their headcount growth been like over the last 6, 12, and 24 months. That will really start to give you a good indicator in terms of the growth of that organization and whether, that's expected to continue, over the coming months and years.
Okay, then. So if we sort of drop down the level from that general expansion, I guess the next one really sort of logically to talk about would be regional growth. So let's just touch on regional growth.
Yeah, so again, I suppose this falls slightly into what I was talking around previously, but regional growth will, again, whether that's new expansion again into a new country, region, that side of things, as I discussed, but also if there's a company that have recently done new office expansion or opening a new office within another region, and we suddenly start to see explicit growth within that specific region, then again, that probably falls in slightly, that general expansion point of view as well. There's obviously been a more so probably immediate find in terms of, they found their market fit again. They've understood that, okay, these are the revenues that we expected, and actually they've exceeded those revenues within the first couple of months. That's probably a big part of that as well. So again, with that, we can really start to pinpoint and understand it within those new regions, new countries, that's where the growth or future growth that they're expecting to see. So again, with that is really understanding in terms of, okay, what's the future plan for that? And again, is your tool going to be able to help them deliver that in more of a capacity than what they've already achieved?
Yeah, no, I guess naturally when you're going for regional expansion or into a new region, you're not necessarily going to be experts in that region. So you're going to be looking for assistance, you're going to be looking for help, you're going to be looking for expertise, which is perhaps one of the sort of prime opportunities to position yourselves as those experts, right?
100%. And ultimately, even when you start, and say that regional growth, the easiest one to talk around is operating within a new country. Realistically, you probably understand it from a sales point of view. You understand it from a market capacity or potential in terms of your potential customers that are within that country. But ultimately, within there as well, there may be new startup companies, other existing companies that operate within a similar space. You don't really understand the coverage that perhaps they've got across your target market. So these are all kind of the different complications that you're then going to find out in that moment. And again, these are things where, again, additional tools, additional support can really help organizations, get ahead of the curve or give them a competitive edge over those perhaps otherwise unknown companies that are within that region as well.
All right, then. So the third one that we were going to sort of cover within expansion plans is business area. So do you want to just quantify what we mean by business area expansion?
So this is, again, understanding really in terms of, okay, the size of the market. So within an organization and probably more established, they may have a array of different services or solutions that they can offer out into the market. And again, once we're starting to operate within new countries, new regions, is it perhaps that one of our products or one of your products is more favorable within that region than others? This again is probably something that companies will start to find out probably over a longer prolonged time within that region, where they've got some quantifiable data. But this is where really within that they may look to expand a certain tool or certain solution that they provide within that specific region. Ultimately, again, it's going to be all centralized around the revenues that they can achieve and how they can achieve their growth plans over that year. But in terms of where some great companies obviously have done this, but it's then understanding in terms of which solution you have has a better market fit than others, and it's doubling down on those solutions to ensure, as I say, you can take that country or that office to the next level in terms of that growth as well.
And how would we look to track? business area? Because it feels like that's perhaps a bit more of a niche one, perhaps one that might not be talked about as much externally. So how would you begin to think about identifying those opportunities?
Yeah, so a really good one actually for this is to track like financial result announcements. Within that, you will see financial results broken down into those specific regions, as well as the different services and solutions that they provide. So actually being able to surface through those really quickly, look at those revenue targets, which will, ultimately they'll be portrayed within year-on-year growth as well. So you can start to see the trends within those in terms of, okay, what did they experience last year compared to this year, and ultimately within that, the ones where you can see that significant increase in that year-on-year growth are really the areas of the business that from a sales point of view you want to be tapping into. They are going to be the areas that they will start doubling down to and will start playing a huge role within their strategy moving into the next year. They're the regions that ultimately are going to have bigger budgets for spend. They're going to be looking at new tools to streamline their operational efficiency, the staff efficiencies, and ultimately, again, help support and grow those revenues even further from where they have been.
Okay, then. So number four, if we will step down another level, would be a new team or a new unit. So I guess that would relate really to the other three potentially. But do you want to just jump into new team or new unit?
Yeah, this is probably one of the best to track because this is a really early indicator in a lot of cases of things going well. So whereas an organization, they've experienced their growth, they've gone through that, they will start to then have really specialist teams in terms of what services, what solutions that they're then providing or selling out into the market. Now, ultimately, if suddenly a new team or unit arises from out of nowhere, it's often an early indicator that actually behind the scenes, the company's been developing new products, again, new services, new solutions that they want to bring into the market. And ultimately, as part of that, you may start to see a transition of a couple of employees within to that new business unit. But ultimately, they're going to start to load up heavily from the ground level. So looking at like SDRs, AEs coming into that unit ready to take that new product to market. So often within this, I'd say out of most of these, they will, where there's other complications that come from launching into new countries, new regions, all that side of things. Actually, if you can start to track where they are hiring in terms of new teams within that organization, this is going to be your earliest indicator that something exciting has happened. And ultimately, where a product or more established company are starting to release new products within the market, they've generally got a really good market fit anyhow. So there's an anticipation of exponential growth right from the off. So where, again, launching that new teams, new systems, they're going to need all the best tools or efficiencies they can in order to get that team up to speed as quick as possible. And ultimately, really define or drill down as much as possible that onboarding to first deal ratio. So in essence, how quickly can we bring a new rep into the business, and how quickly can we start bringing them up to speed and ultimately start making profit for that business as well. So there's a lot of things more so from an operational point of view in terms of efficiency that they will really want to look at to help improve and take that straight up to their expectations.
Now, obviously, we're sort of coming at this from a sales focus, but new team, new unit, that's obviously a massive, alarm bell or bell ringing for recruiters as well, right? So if you're working in staffing, that is a prime opportunity to reach out with, to sign a new client or to offer candidates, right?
Exactly that, yeah. So, again, there's probably going to be early indications, as I said, initial people starting to move across into new departments in order to help put some experienced heads within there. But again, in terms of doing that, they're going to need to grow that team out fairly quickly because they will have big revenue targets to hit. They're not going to be as big as the main part of the business, but this would have been projects that the company's been working on for maybe 12 months, maybe even 36. In some cases, there's going to be a lot of expectation in terms of, okay, what this new product or new team are going to achieve. So the importance of bringing in experienced, upskilled people within that to help achieve those revenue targets is going to be absolutely paramount in order for them to achieve that.
And I think as part of that, new team growth, I think there's a stat something like when someone goes into a new role, obviously they're looking to make a mark for themselves. They're looking to, like you said, increase that speed to the first deal. So they often look to spend, I think, something like 70% of it's either 70% of the budget spent or 70% of people in new roles spend money in their first certain number of days because they, like you said, they're trying to improve operational efficiencies and they want to prove themselves, right? So there's a good opportunity for spend in that initial period, isn't it?
100%. And again, this comes down a lot to, how can they improve that operational efficiency and get people up to speed as quick as possible. The more kind of important part, certainly from looking at it from a SaaS point of view, is if you're looking for your reps to be operating at 5 times or 10 times their base salary, the ability where they have a budget initially will have been incorporated into that when you start looking at quotas and everything else they're looking to achieve. So where they may spend early within that process is to get people up to that speed quicker than expected, with ultimately then looking over the 12-month or 24-month period that those sales reps in terms of their times-based salary and operational efficiency are going to be operating way above their expectations. So they will spend early to get those tools cemented and provide new ways of working, basically giving them quicker access into their ICP market and quicker availability to sell. But ultimately, with the longer term, that actually these people are going to be, operating way above actually the desired outcome.
Where's the best place to track new team, new unit news?
Probably a bit of a tougher one, really. Again, you're probably starting to track job boards, LinkedIn, to have a look at what roles are being advertised, or even your key kind of market movers. So, for argument's sake, you want to be tracking any kind of VPs of sales, any heads of sales, or perhaps sales managers in terms of where are they being promoted within that organization. So there are other tools out there where you can start to utilize this, but LinkedIn probably is the one that everybody has access to. And whether you're starting to then on your target clients and you're within sales now, you can start to essentially add these people into lead lists and start to get those notifications as in when people move. But really it's then probably a bit of a manual process in terms of, okay, what regions does that company currently have? Okay, there's 2 people that have just moved into this unit or this region. So there's probably a bit of a crossover between manual and automated within that, but it is around kind of getting organized, and it's certainly around tracking those key stakeholder movements initially.
Okay, the last one is actually, I guess it ties really well into the new team, new unit, but existing teams, existing units also grow. So team growth is the final one that we're going to be talking about within expansion plan. So let's run through team growth.
Yeah, there's probably dependent on the product or service that you're selling. There's probably a couple of things that you really want to track within that. So, team growth is ultimately the goal for most businesses, obviously being pretty sales led. But really, it's understanding, okay, what aspect or what part of the team are they growing out? Are they just growing out from the top and they're bringing in more structure? So perhaps from where a startup is loaded in really heavy from the baseline, are they starting to bring more experienced heads in? That will then lead to spend as well, because those people have their own ideas, own experiences that they're bringing into that organization. We'll start looking at that from an operational point of view. But if it's more of a established business, where is it they're starting to load up heavy? Is it within their account executive region? Is it from an SDR level? So it's then understanding and saying, okay, well, where does your product then fit into that process? How can you aid that growth from that level? There's not anybody out there that can aid it from all angles. Amazing if there was, but that's not really the case. But it's about understanding, okay, where is it they're trying to grow that team out from and why? Is it actually they're looking for more of a junior level because they want to start to progress individuals up through the business, and ultimately that may then lead into obviously revenue growth, but actually it may be early strategy signs that they may have a new product coming further down the line. They're looking to get some more experienced people that they can then start to move across. Or is it purely more from a structural point of view that, again, they've proven that their best operational efficiency in terms of working comes from having a bigger structure, perhaps more from an SDR level, helping to then feed up into more of the AEs.
Okay, so that's 5 different triggers that we've spoken about, and I think I've just been jotting down the number of different places that you'd have to track in order to just look at those 5, and I think we're on 6 or 7 just within those 5. So, we talked about industry news, Google Alerts, LinkedIn. We spoke about financial results, company websites, and that's getting pretty exhaustive just for those 5 sales triggers. So I think there is I guess a massive movement or massive trend in the reaching out with relevance is key now. Like, people don't want to be pitch slapped, whatever you want to call it. They don't want spam. They don't want cold outreach. So it has to be relevant. But if you're working, I think we said it on the last episode, if you're working anywhere from 100 to 200 leads a month, like active leads, and you're working them, then you're potentially having to track hundreds of different sources of information, which is where Selligence comes in, and we automate that for you. But is there anything that you wanted to touch on in terms of that automation angle, that Selligence angle, just to finish up?
Yeah, I think you've got to play this smart, but the difficult part from, let's say, traditional processes is you can gather the information and you can find it, but again, you're going to be looking in a lot of different places. But where the real differentiator is it relies you on going in, running those searches multiple days. You're also then starting to, where we started to say around, team growth. You're starting to then see, okay, and you're starting to look at, okay, what jobs are they advertising, in what region, in what department. You're starting to look at multiple different factors, and essentially you've got to start to create that image, or almost try and draw up that strategy from your own angle, which, let's face it, is not always correct. But whereas, if the information's being provided to you and we can see that, okay, they're starting to advertise for these roles, but 2 months ago they've announced that, okay, they're starting to work on new products and new services. Oh, and by the way, they've opened up a new office. When you start to put all of these together and create more of that picture autonomously, then suddenly you're in a much better place. So when you make that first call or have that first conversation, you can actually, you've done your research, but actually you can start having more of a strategic conversation with the buyer in terms of, look, I can see you've done this, I can see you've done that. Ultimately, what's the bigger picture, or what are the bigger project plans over the next 12 months? Is that then something that your service or product can then fit into to speed up that process and ultimately make it more efficient?
Brilliant. Okay, then, so that's another 5, or another category of trigger covered, another 5 sub triggers covered within that. I think in the next episode, we're going to be actually sort of looking into new offices, which we've sort of spoken about this week, but we actually track another 6 sub triggers, or subcategories within that, and we'll do another rundown, another deep dive on each of those. But thank you for listening to another episode. Hopefully those 5 triggers give you something to go after, and that you can start making the most of them. But yeah, thanks for joining, Nick, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Nice.